Hello, check, check, check. Sure. Oh, okay. Hello, hello, check.
6, and there are 11 of us.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so Julie's with us virtually too. And here's the sheriff's here. So I should pass this on around and then. Thank you. Thank you. Hey. Well. If you turn on your mic, they can hear you. Yeah.
Hello to everybody on Zoom.
Where did Miss Renbeck go? Where Karen went? I was looking for Karen Renbeck. Okay, well, it's 4:32, so I wish to call to order this meeting of the Monroe County Community Justice Response Committee. It is March the 20th, and I will note for the record that Commissioner Thomas, Councillor Iverson, and Councillor Crosley are with us virtually, and I hope Karen Renbeck will return quickly. Councillor Iverson, if you're feeling good enough, would you please read the guiding principles? You need to unmute.
Our guiding principles. Oh, hold on. Sorry.
I think so.
My apologies. It's not on the agenda online. May I please respectfully ask that someone else read it?
Councillor Wiltz, do you have your hard copy? Yeah,
Happy to, yes.
thank you.
The Community Justice Response Committee's guiding principles, recognizing our commitment to public safety, we will work collaboratively and transparently to 1, prioritize treatment over incarceration when appropriate. 2, build a justice facility that meets constitutional standards and treats inmates with dignity. 3, address inequities in race, economic status, disability, national origin, sexual orientation, and gender. And 4, reduce the number of people entering the criminal justice system and reduce recidivism for those who are or were in the system.
Thank you very much. We'll now have a roll call, Ms. Motion. Your roll call? Do you need this?
Commissioner Givens,
Yes.
Commissioner Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Wiltz,
Here.
Judge Crothy,
Here.
Judge Stafford,
Here.
Sheriff Marte,
Here.
from the prosecutor's office, April Wilson.
Here.
And from the public defender's office, Karen Renbeck. Here. And Commissioner Thomas, Counselor Iverson, and Counselor Crossley are all attending virtually.
Here.
Here.
Welcome, yes. Okay, it's now, we'll move on to public comment. First up that we have here today is Maquiba Reese. Would you please come up to the microphone and we'll make sure it's turned on. Good afternoon. I'm sorry, up here. I'm sorry.
I'm living. Hi there. So I have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Maquiba Reese, and I serve as the president for the Monroe County NAACP. And to the Community Justice Response Committee, Leadership, Accountability, and Public Service. The mission of the NAACP is to achieve equity, political rights, and social inclusion by advancing policies and practices that expand human and civil rights, eliminate discrimination, and accelerate the well-being, education, and economic security of Black people and all persons of color. Aligning with our mission, we members of the Monroe County branch of the NAACP seek to address some concerns and issues, a call to action as the CJRC moves forward in making very important decisions that affect the people of Monroe County. As elected officials, many of you have requested our support and attended several of our events, such as Freedom Fund Banquet each year. We provided space and acknowledgement. And we also have given opportunity at the annual MLK celebration, where ideals of justice, equity, and peace are amplified. Now is the time to hold you all accountable to ensure the citizens of this community, including those who are incarcerated, are cared for, supported, and respected. We emphasize the need for effective leadership that is consistent, thoughtful, and strategic leadership that prioritizes the human conditions. We understand that some time is strong determination of next steps, but reports and presentations provided in previous meetings indicate the urgent need to improve upon certain conditions that facilitate and, more importantly, respond to the needs that occupy them. We call for the clear implementation of a system of checks and balances where no one is exempt, from county commissioners to the sheriff's department and everyone in between. As public servants, we call for you to do the hard work with the highest level of transparency, meetings, questions, constructive criticism with kindness and consideration instead of avoidance and insults. In the same vein, we are compelled to express our disgust and frustration with disrespectful treatment that Councilwoman Jennifer Crossley and Sheriff Ruben Marte have been subject to as convening of the CJRC. As the only 2 people of color involved at this level, these individuals deal with enough outside of this space and simply because of the color of their skin. The very public display is deplorable behavior, including rude tone and comments, microaggressions, dismissive body language, and gaslighting by Commissioners Penny Givens and Lee Jones. In response to Councilwoman Crossley and Sheriff Marte are in direct opposition to the spirit of collaboration that should be evident in these types of settings. Additionally, we call for committee members who witness this behavior to hold your colleagues accountable. If you do not speak up, you are complicit, which can do much just as harm. If you are seeking to say something, please say something and speak up. In closing, we encourage the CJRC to be true to your commitment to public service. Do your work in public, engage in the community, embrace collaboration, not just on your terms, but on the terms of every stakeholder involved. We also take this time to express gratitude for the recent authorization by the County Council to allocate additional funds for cleaning and maintenance of the jail facilities and for supporting the proposal for hiring additional staff members of the facilities. We thank you for your service and recognize that this work is challenging, but to whom is much given, much is required. You took an oath to represent the people of Monroe County, and this is a prime opportunity to put your best foot forward and honor the responsibilities you have been entrusted with those that you serve. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. Is there anyone, a participant online who wishes
Yes,
to?
Audrey
provide-
Williams has her hand raised on Zoom.
Okay,
Hello, can you all hear me?
yes.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Audrey Williams and I'm a county resident. I am increasingly becoming discouraged watching these committee meetings. There is nothing more disturbing than watching an ACLU lawyer talk about how detained individuals have been living in inhumane conditions for 15 years. And it seems that the only question that committee members are concerned with is what happens to us if we continue to do nothing. I'm not even sure what to say to that. As it is, this committee is not functional. I would like the individual members of this committee to stop trying to be the best and start trying to work together. each member needs to learn what it is to compromise and that there are many different ways to compromise instead of just trying to argue further. Perhaps subcommittees could be useful. However, the proposed quarterly full meeting seems far too infrequent to be meaningful for progress to be made in any kind of timely fashion. Many committee members say they are actually willing to meet more frequently than 2 weeks a month. So perhaps the other Mondays could be used for subcommittee meetings, and then the current full committee meetings could be continued on their current schedule. The commissioners also say they would like detained individuals input on facility development, but there's not enough money to contribute towards improving the current facility while they're talking about a new facility that needs to be built. And so perhaps some of the individuals that have come to speak to this very committee could actually serve on some of these subcommittees. And instead, the $83,000 that has been slated for a survey of detained individuals could be instead given over to improvements of the current facility. It's just very frustrating to see that this committee is so dysfunctional. Last meeting, Judge Stafford provided a land needs assessment based on very rough calculations that she did. And Commissioner Githen's first question to her was, what parameters did she use for those calculations? That is a very valid question. However, Commissioner Githen also seems very offended when people ask her the same question of what parameters is she using when she says there needs to be 25 acres. So it's just very odd that there is no clear communication amongst the committee members, and you all cannot seem to function as an actual committee. Commissioner Githens also seemed somewhat shocked when Councilor Iverson mentioned that the committee may not provide blanket approval when the commissioners recommend that they would like when the commissioners make a recommendation that they would like when the council reviews what the commissioners recommend. So I would ask that you actually work together and not actually wait until the ACLU refuses to extend their agreement or until somebody decides to sue you all for not actually improving the standards that they are in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Next is Mary Getzey. Good afternoon.
Yes, I heard the discussion at the meetings. I'm a community member and I'm very interested in the progress of this committee and disappointed that you kind of are at a stall. I heard the proposal to break up into committees last time, which would mean going to quarterly meetings. I feel shut out as a community member. I can't believe that there would be 2 more meetings in this room for the entire year. And that if we wanted to know what's going on, we'd have to keep pace on 4 different committees. I feel at the very least, we should have at least 1 monthly meeting, and if not, continuing with 2. I think that's not healthy for the community, for your committee, because you need to, as was stated in the previous one, work to collaborate more, listen to one another, and really help move this process along. And so I would ask that I would vote very strongly against that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else virtually? Okay, then next is Isabel Piedmont Smith.
Hello, I'm Isabel Piedmont Smith. I serve on the Bloomington City Council and have for 11 years. I just simply want to say that I'm, as a elected representative for the city of Bloomington, I am eager to know when it's my turn to have input onto the future of community justice in Monroe County. Also, as a long-term NAACP member, I want to just support what Maquiba Reese said earlier. Thank you.
Sure. TSD, can you turn on the closed caption?
It's on this one, but not on the big ones.
Thank you, Judge Stafford.
Thank you.
Next, Seth Mutchler.
Good afternoon. I actually had two public comments that I was trying to decide between, so I'll email you the alternate. Good afternoon. My name is Seth Mutchler, and I'm a resident of Monroe County. I plan today to criticize the request for qualifications or RFQ process and decisions made within. When I saw there was a slated April 3rd presentation by RFQ committee, I was presumed that meant that the committee would be presenting to the CJRC and public for input and feedback. It turns out instead, they'll be saying, "We made a decision without you, here it is, deal with it." 2 months ago, in mid-January, the jail facility RFQ committee already met with the 3 firms who gave proposals. On March 8th, the RFQ committee gave the commissioners their recommendation. The commissioners plan on voting to grant the contract to the selected firm, DLZ, at their meeting this Wednesday. The original request for qualifications from the county states that, quote, "The committee will request presentations from each submitter. These presentations will be open to the public and may include a public display / presentation," end quote. These presentations occurred, but they were not open to the public. So what's the big deal? Well, beyond the total lack of transparency, the chosen firm DLZ brings up many concerns. This is the same firm that was responsible for the current jail's 2007 and 2010 interior renovations and 2014 interior improvements. I don't want the same company who failed to fix our current jail designing our next one. In addition, in designing the Elkhart County Correctional Complex, quote, "The Criminal Justice Facility Assessment Study identified an initial need for 1,000 adult inmate beds," end quote. Somehow, though, they ended up with a facility holding 2,800 beds. This is what happens when you hire a company who proudly boasts they have completed $1.25 billion in justice work in the past 5 years alone. I already desired a hold on forward momentum with this project due to moral, fiscal, political, and pragmatic reasons. I am further against this new construction, given this egregious lack of transparency and questionable judgment. I call today for the county commissioners to not vote on any design firm until both the public and public officials have had an opportunity to weigh in and there is a consensus on next steps. I fear the commissioners will give no heed to this call, however. So I secondarily call upon all of the other members of this committee to hold them accountable and ask that you follow in my demand. Thank you for your time and for your attention.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Then if it's okay with the rest of the committee, I'd like to go ahead with our rest of our agenda, seeing as there's no other public comment. Today, we're to be looking at the different facilities that different ones of us have visited. And I thought it would be most productive, if it's okay again, that we go facility by facility and talk about the things we saw, things we liked, things we didn't like, what might impact our decisions. And we thought we'd use the board, write them down, get pictures, flip it around, use the other side for Hamilton. We'll keep going in that vein if that seems a legitimate way to go with stuff. Ms. Wilson.
I think that sounds wonderful. I was just wondering if we could start with the Arizona report, just because that would be new information. If that would work for your schedule.
How does the rest of, I'm fine with that. There were 3 different facilities in Arizona, so I was counting on Commissioner Thomas to take notes on the board so they get this. Do you want to? Okay, so we'll start then with what we saw in Arizona. The first place that we had visited out there was Maricopa County, and I would like to clarify for the record that Sheriff Arpaio ceased being the sheriff out there, I think, in 2016, and that we visited one of the 5 jails in Maricopa County. This was a new jail that had been completed just 2 years ago, and it was divided into different sections. Basically, there was an intake, transfer, and release section. There was something that was a short-term hold area, and then there was what was called the Watkins area. And so I think it would be best if we started with the intake, transfer, and release section, because that was the first part that we saw. And I want to say this is quite a large facility. The commander who took us through, Captain Mossman, said that if she leaves her office and walks all the way to the Watkins area, it's 5,500 steps. So this is quite a large facility. The actual processing and jail parts of it were a single story, which is what we've all been hearing in terms of what's recommended. The only part that I remember seeing that was second story was where they kept people's possessions. And that was a specially designed room. They had 2 officers that were responsible just for overseeing the people's possessions. They were stored in vacuum packed bags, and there was video on there every day. And every day they did a log of what they were collecting, so that they had a very firm idea of what people's possessions were. So for me, one of the pros was that they had a separate dedicated room with separate dedicated officers that oversaw inmate possessions.
Can I ask how many beds are in that facility?
Well, that's why I was breaking it down into 3 separate units within there, because the intake and transfer and release, really the only kinds of beds that they had would have been holding cells within that. And so
Well, I guess
actually the
for
Watkins
for people who use the inmate possession room, I assume they're staying there.
part of them, yes.
Okay.
Some of them were actually then moved on to the Department of Corrections, and if so, then people had to sign a special form for identified individuals to come collect their possessions. Yes.
And Commissioner Githens, what was the name of this specific jail that we're referring to?
Of the specific jail. Well, the jail part of itself was Watkins. Commissioner Thomas, that's how I think of it. Did you?
Yeah, so the first part that Commissioner Githens is talking about is just called the ITR, the Intake, Transfer and Release Center.
So because it's so big, they also have 2 separate intake areas, one for involuntary and the other for voluntary. And the voluntary would be people that were, say, assigned to do 2 days in the jail by a judge and could come in on their own time. So, but with each of these, they had medical intake, they had search areas, they had what else? Sorry, I taking notes on fingerprinting, mugshots, everything else that went with it. Each person that came in through the intake was offered a snack and Gatorade, and the staff there said that made a big difference. The snack was actually prepared on and packaged on site.
Commissioner, Councilmember Crossley has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yes. So for me, that was another pro that they had. Immediately gave them snack and beverage, which they said calmed many of the people. Yes, sorry. I'm not looking at the screen. I'm looking at my notes. Thank you, Councilor Crossley.
Yeah, and you're welcome. Or yes, thank you. I had a similar question as April did, because in preparation for today, I noticed I was a little I know Maricopa County is huge, which was a question that I wondered. I guess I kind of have a 2-part question. So if I can, if that is okay. I was just curious to see, I guess, what is so specific about Maricopa County that we were really interested to go take a look at. And my second question is, I see that they mentioned the 5 different jails, and I know some of the jails were either an all-male facility or an all-female facility, and then there was one that is kind of a little bit of both. So I was curious, you said you don't know the name of the jails? Because there's the 4th Avenue Jail, the Durango Jail, the Estrella Jail, Lower Buckeye Jail, and the Tower Jail. And they all have a large amount of bed counts. So I was just curious to figure out which one, which one.
If I go back, I've got the address recorded in my notes. I can go back and then provide that later to you. This was an all-male facility.
Okay.
We were told that the females were kept in a different facility.
Okay. Okay. And then I just, I'm sorry.
No. And then why did we go to this particular? Right. The impetus for the trip was largely driven by going to look at a crisis center that was in Pima County, which is Tucson. And so because we were headed out there to look at that, which is pretty unique, we wanted to see other things along the way. We didn't want to just make it a one-stop kind of trip. And the way they have things set up was different than what we saw in at least the jails that I visited in Indiana with regard to how people are processed. And also once they are in the facility, they try to allow people as much freedom as possible. And one of the things that they did in the actual jail part was what they call direct supervision. And they had an officer inside the pod with the individuals. And so in addition to having cameras and a central kind of observation post, they had somebody in there on a regular basis. This was also the only facility that I have seen where each kind of unit had its own recreation area. And they basically could go out there almost any time that they chose during the daytime. They weren't restricted. They didn't have to be transported. It really reduced the personnel that was available. And also the attitude was, we want to treat you how we want you to behave once you leave here. The philosophy was to give you I'm not saying this correctly, but is to be as positive about your time there as possible, so that the better you behave, the better you were treated. In the unit that we saw, or one of them, like I said, you could basically go out to the rec yard anytime you wanted. The group could decide whether they could do basketball, do volleyball. The day we were there, it was a very energetic volleyball game. There was a hot water dispenser off on one side. So if you had your ramen or something else that you needed something hot for, it was right there. You could stir it in. There was a big, enormous day room with individual chairs so that it wasn't just the table and the seat bolted down to the floor. It could be moved around. We saw rocking chairs, which were very soothing to certain people. There was a big 75-inch TV that would give people an opportunity for something to do. And one of the comments we heard was, with the direct supervision model, if people were good, instead of saying, okay, lights out at 10 p.m., you can stay up till 11:30. Instead of saying, here's what you're going to watch today on TV, we've got 3 different movies scrolled up. Which of the 3 do you want to watch, or do you want to watch first? The other thing is, in that least restrictive unit, every single person in there, and they could hold up to 80 in that, every single one had a tablet to use. And they had, let me look for my numbers here. They had, I think it was 800 educational opportunities available on the tablet for each person to use. Now, that's a lot of money, but it also, if that provides people with education, provides them with things that they can stay busy and something to look forward to as they leave. Hopefully it reduces recidivism as well. They also use the tablets for interacting with their lawyers, with their families, and at times with medical issues, if I remember right. Let's see. Oh, I wrote down their philosophy. The philosophy at every step is act like an adult and we will treat you like an adult. If people came in with money, it was immediately deposited through an ATM, and on exit, people were given that money back on a debit card so that they weren't worried about extra cash going through. That there shouldn't be any problem with that. There were two, if I remember, two courtrooms in the facility, one for misdemeanors and one for felony arrests. And they basically ran their courts once every 3 hours, 24/7. Commissioner Thomas, you want to add some stuff here?
Sure, I was just looking through my notes as well. I think it's one of the important things here is that there's 3 separate units involved here. The first one is the Intake Transfer Release Center. The second unit we looked at is called the 512 unit, which is a holding facility for short-term stays. They don't have staff, so they can't open it, but the building's done. And then the third unit we looked at Maricopa is the Watkins Residential Center. So those are the three units that we looked at. I think one of the important things we learned from these folks is that they had worked on the blueprints with their designer for the facility. And in Arizona, there's a different government setup than we have in Monroe County. But they said that what happened was a regional fiscal oversight body took the blueprints and made changes to reduce costs. And then the blueprints weren't returned for another review. And so a lot of things were missing, left out, shortchanged that were really important to the jail staff. And so I think, this is something that really informed our take on how to manage this facilities subcommittee and how to ensure that once we have an initial set of blueprints that we're basically going to walk it around to every single interested relevant party to get feedback before sending it back for review. And just keeping everybody in the loop is so important. That was a really critical thing that we learned just from the staff there. And some of the things that they talked about help us understand the process and the flow of the facility and the significance of that. And also the decision-making about the order to place certain things in that booking process. For example, do you do the scanner first or the medical review of the arrestee first? And so there are a lot of little details like that we learned a great deal about by going to this particular ITR facility.
Even in the intake area, there was the attitude of if you act like an adult, we'll treat you like an adult. We saw people napping in a regular chair as they were sitting there waiting for things. They also had somebody who was assigned to review each intake form before somebody was completely processed, so that there's a double check on everything to make sure, because we're human, mistakes can be made. So it's just was a double check on things to see that things happened. In the least restrictive unit that we saw, like I said, there was a big, huge day room, and then there were 2 tiers of basically cubby holes, and they didn't have doors on them. only that outer door to the big, huge living area was what was closed and locked. In the cubbyhole area, there were 10 bunk beds. And in that least restrictive area, again, they actually had shelving for people to keep their individual personal items on. So that was encouraging to see. They did have, though, more restrictive units, and in those more restrictive units, they did have doors on the individual kind of cubbies so that they could move people around. As we were there too, we had left that least restrictive unit, and we walked inside and saw it. As we were leaving, I said, well, what happens if there's a problem? And within 2 minutes, we heard somebody yelling and screaming. And because of the physical setup that they have, and they had what they called a core area, but we've seen similar things in terms of here in Indiana, where there's a single person that's watching out on things. Suddenly, a whole group of people were there to escort that person to the medical unit, which is where the person needed to go. All we heard was them calming him. Whatever his name was, it was, okay, George, talk to us about what's happening. Okay, let's keep moving. And so I think that what I've heard from Sheriff Marte's staff, this kind of an attitude and approach is something that fits with the kind of philosophy that I feel like I've heard from your staff as well. And so this was sort of the physical setup that would support that kind of an approach to how we have people incarcerated. Is that capture? And there were problems. They said there were problems, but
the one thing that I would add that particularly caught my attention, well, actually two things. First of all, while all of the furniture was washable, it was soft. It was comfortable for them to sit on. Many other places it sees fold up tables with tiny little round seats attached to the table that could only be comfortable for a child to sit on. I was very impressed by that. I also was impressed by the fact that real efforts were made to keep people entertained, to keep them busy and doing something. They all had assigned tasks that they had to take care of, but there were also game tables. There was the possibility of recreation at any time. There were the tablets, there was a TV. There were just a lot of things that kept people's minds engaged, so they didn't need to resort to some of the behavior we've seen in our jail, where people have, or at least used to have, nothing to do.
There's hands
right,
raised.
and we've got hands raised. Yes, thank you, Counselor Iverson.
My question is about the ITR. Can you talk about how they handled release in the jail system there?
Yes, they actually went back through a thumbprinting and a two-finger fingerprinting to ensure that it was the person that they thought that they were releasing. And that's the point when they were given the debit card with any cash that they might have walked in with. If they came in without shoes, and we've heard this story that has happened here, people enter without shoes, they actually have small slip-ons there that they wear in the facility. They're given those if they came in, and occasionally people come in without clothes or without a lot of clothes. And of course, this was Phoenix, where it tends to be a lot warmer. At exit, they will give them a set of paper clothing as well. So there was a very much a checklist, but it was pretty thorough. Yes.
Were there social service agencies on hand for release, or was there transportation available to folks to get to where they needed to be going?
I didn't have that in my notes. I don't know if Commissioner Jones or Thomas can respond to that.
I believe that there was a desk space provided in the intake area for service agencies to use. And yeah, I'm not too sure about They did have buses. We saw them bringing people to and fro. And they kind of announced that buses were what they did at all their jails pretty much.
Yeah. And of course, Phoenix is very large and very spread out as well. But it seemed a very planned procedure. Commissioner Thomas, can you add to that, or what's your question or addition?
Yeah, a couple things. So I think we were most impressed with how Yavapai handled the release side of it. So we're gonna, I think, talk about that in a second. Which is, it was a really great system. So we can shed some light on that. It was much more comprehensive than what Maricopa had. In terms of Watkins can hold up to 1,600 inmates. It typically has 1,300 to 1,400 population. So obviously, even though this is just one facility among many, in Maricopa County is much bigger than anything we're going to build. But it's still worth looking at large facilities, small facilities to learn what you can. So this is typically a sentence of under a year. So these are going to be more minimum security. This is a minimum security facility. But what was really impressive is that, so each pod holds 80 inmates. The bunks, as Commissioner Giffen said, are all pretty much open. There's not individual cells. The pod itself is the confined space, which is not always closed anyway. But the recreation space was so important. Natural light everywhere. There's 4 classrooms, including a computer lab. There's a court desk center where one officer sort of handles all of the flow of the entire facility at one time. They use the direct supervisor model. There's library of books, there's program rooms, again, tablets available not just for education, but also to do surveying on and to start programs like NA and AA. And to get hooked into those programs before release as well. The fact is that with this number of inmates, they had 3 to 4 registered nurses on with assistants on staff, plus 1 or 2 medical providers at any time, plus 2 mental health specialists on staff. So the medical needs were taken care of. But also within each pod, there's an interview room to meet with the attorney, chaplain, or others in a more private setting. So really, they took that direct supervision model and really made it work for them, because it is a very calm environment. There's no graffiti anywhere. The facility just seemed to run like clockwork. It was pretty amazing.
Very high ceilings as well, which also complements that natural light. And the new jails that we saw all rely on a lot of cameras as well within the facility, but that means fewer staff. And from what we saw, people were more relaxed. The staff especially, they did say that they felt like they needed more storage space. And in fact, each of these pods or units had a small storage space. Each of them had its own program room, and each of them had a small medical exam room in that unit itself, so that people went to the inmates, not the inmates leaving. And again, that reduces the need for staff, which is another plus. They suggested building more staff bathrooms. You know, like I said, the one person that the captain that was showing us around said she could walk from her office down into Watkins, and it was 5,500 steps. Well, unless you're building staff bathrooms inside that facility at different points, it makes it much more difficult. I see. I'll get to that in just a second. And pre-COVID, they did do drug rehab and anger management within the facility. And they also suggested that there be a staff break room inside the secure area so that they weren't having to leave there, especially in case they needed to be called up quickly. But they had quite a nice staff room with free snacks for the staff, a foosball table, and some other stuff that was quite fun. Yes, Counselor Iverson. I'm sorry, Counselor Crossley. I'm looking right at you. Sorry.
So a couple of things, and I'm trying to put on my visual glasses on top of the glasses I already have on. And I was just curious to see, I started to ask this question because I really like taking photos with folks that are being housed in facilities. It gives me a little bit pause because I don't want this to seem like it's a circus where we're paying attention and looking at everybody as they're going through, because they're in a very vulnerable state of their life at the moment while they're being housed there. But I'm finding it really difficult almost to kind of follow through. Do y'all have like any pictures from this, or do you have any kind of like floor plans or anything that we can follow with? And then I guess my follow-up question would be, you and Commissioner Giffens, you might be getting to this here shortly. I hear a lot of likes, but I was just curious to see like what are some of the cons to or this particular location that y'all went to go see?
Well, some of the cons were, more staff bathrooms, staff break room inside the secure area within Watkins, not enough storage, changes made without going back to the people to ensure that it met the needs of the people that were working there. So there were cons to it, definitely. We were asked not to take photos, and I think that's probably common practice a lot of places. So we don't have photos of the facility because of that. I have a picture of the outside, but that's it. Yes.
Yes, Commissioner. I was wondering, you mentioned that there were 2 courts in this particular jail and that they ran 24 hours every 3 hours. Was that solely for initial hearings or for the life of a case? Because you also mentioned that there were buses, and I wasn't sure if that was transporting inmates for other purposes.
I know it was for initial, and I honestly couldn't tell you if it was for ongoing. I do know that they also could use their tablets for hearings if they were wanting to, if they didn't want to have the in-person. I know that it's their right to have an in-person hearing if they wish. I'm sorry, we could email them. We had a very good relationship, I felt like, with the folks that we were working with. Do you know, Commissioner Thomas?
Yeah, so what I have in my notes, the county court has hearings every 3 hours, including a night and weekend court, and this is just for initial hearings. And again, this is in the ITR. So that's why they would just have initial hearings. The second court that's there only goes into session twice a day on weekdays, and that's the city municipal court. So they have a county court, and then they have the city municipal court, and there are different setups. And the municipal court hears misdemeanors only. And then along with that, they have a victim space so they can watch the proceedings safely. And there is space for attorney interview rooms, and there's a public viewing room, but since COVID, they've changed that to a TV-based space where you can watch the hearings in a separate room out just inside the facility in the lobby. The judges can also conduct hearings in isolation cells if somebody is put into an isolation cell for whatever reason, or in the medical area if they need to do that. So that's how they conduct hearings at the ITR.
Judge Stafford.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify for anyone here that we do not have separate city and county courts in our area. Some other parts of the state do. We only have county courts. And if we compare 1,600 beds in that facility to maybe 450 beds in our facility, that's roughly a 4 times larger facility. How many what percentage, what is the total population of the county served by this? If that's Maricopa County, or if this is a portion of Maricopa County, so I get an idea of scale.
Oh, I didn't look that up. I looked up Pima County where Tucson is, which I think right now, if I remember right, Phoenix is the 6th or 7th largest city in the United States because it's growing so quickly.
I think it's the 3rd largest county in the United States population wise. It's huge.
In terms of comparison, that is not really an apples to apples comparison. It is maybe not within our reach to have that volume.
Of course.
Which is good, right?
Of course, but we thought it was beneficial to look at, because Yavapai is much smaller. So we're looking at a large range of these facilities to get a sense of design issues and ways to accommodate inmates and staff safety, that do stretch across no matter how many inmates you have.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course. Please.
Do you know what their budget is in comparison to what ours would be, or do we have any idea?
I don't have that either.
Thank you.
I know that they, like many places around the country, are short-staffed, that they are down a good number from what they would like to have. And so that'll impact what their outlay is in any given year right now too. They did also have an isolation hallway for people that were on suicide watch, and that way they could have cameras, and they did a check, 4 times an hour, which would be pretty standard, I think, for what goes on. But they had that as a separate location that they could work on with people. Do you have anything else to add to this?
No, I don't. I think it's been pretty thoroughly discussed.
Do you have anything else, Commissioner Thomas? And are there any other questions about what the facility is? I'm sorry that we weren't allowed to take pictures and we don't have a layout for you. Yes, Counselor Wiltz.
I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that there was a lot of information on these exact facilities broken down by facility on the Maricopa County's, I guess it's the Sheriff's Office website. It's mcso.org. And it's got a lot of great information that kind of summarizes even some of the things that you were talking about.
Thank you. So shall we get a picture of this and then move on to Yavapai, which is Yavapai is Prescott, which is the second place we went. And in Yavapai, they already have one jail. Sorry, I need to go back to my notes here. The Camp Verde jail, they referred to it as. And what we saw was a facility that was almost at completion in terms of being built. And this was a co-located facility where there were courts right there at the location. And the courts were the front of the building, and the courts themselves were a 2-story. The jail that we saw was a single story. And one of the unique things that there, we went on the tour with Captain Stump and Brent Cambrio, but we also were accompanied by Bea Thayer, who was the release coordinator for that county. And this was a very unique situation because anyone, sort of the minute they were brought into the facility, they were assigned a release officer or release coordinator who would start to already talk about what their release was going to look like. And this was very, very unique also. It's not their primary jail. it's they had an early disposition court, and the intent is that at this new facility, they would keep people for approximately 2 weeks after their initial disposition. One of the suggestions that they had for us while there was that to think about a separate processing area for juveniles and to have a separate accommodation area. I think that we handle juveniles differently here. And so I'm very pleased about that. But that was what they were talking about. They get state funding for their release program. They also use some federal dollars and profits from their commissary to help fund this release program. They have a crisis stabilization unit within the facility that can hold people for up to 23 hours. And individuals at this facility, and again, each county, it seems, out there is different, and they're huge in terms of just the geography of it. But there they would stay in the intake area until they see a judge. And this can also be by a video hearing. And they also, like Maricopa, they have a weekend and holiday judge, and they do initial hearings throughout the day. The release coordinator has an office in the intake area itself. And when I say that they have somebody assigned at intake, the release may be 3 months off, but that person still follows the inmate throughout. One of the cons that they told us about is that they made an error when designing their detox cells. There was no space in them for a bunk. There was, it looked like what could be a seating area. It was about this deep. It would not have been comfortable for me, and I'm not a big, tall person, to sit on that. And there was also a bump out in the middle of part of the cells so that you couldn't get a visual, and there were doors on both ends of the cell. You couldn't get a visual to see everything on the other side of that bump out. So one of their recommendations to us, which I feel is really useful, is that we always ask for 3D designs to look at what's being built. In this particular place, they had 5 different units, and in the 2 big units, they had a single rec area that was shared by the 2 units. It was placed between the two jail units. But that meant that somebody couldn't just use it throughout the day the way they could in Maricopa. They also had to worry, they're north, and their climate is a lot more like ours. So they had to worry about things like, since it was open air, whether the drains would freeze, and building the drain so that, might be wrapped with wire and that kind of thing, a heating coil to keep it from freezing. So there were just little things that they brought up as we went through. They had a centralized control, both in Yavapai and in Maricopa counties. They did not use steel cells, which is what we saw here in Vigo and Hamilton counties for the people that went on those tours. These were concrete block and then covered with, I don't know what you cover with, but, yeah, whatever. But they were not the steel cells. But even so, in Yavapai, they could access things from the back of the cell, which is another important thing, apparently, as you're building things, because you can shut water off to the individual cell more easily without having to go in. You can control things in a different way. They had a really nice training and staffing area for their staff, and they had a separate fitness room for their staff as well. I didn't feel like what we saw in Yavapai, and this is not a criticism, but it didn't have the same kind of light, natural light that we saw in Maricopa. It just didn't give you that sense of calmness in there. But they were very, very thorough in designing their intake. All of it can be from one side or the other. You can move people through. The big thing there, though, for me, was that there was a release center right on site. When you were released from the facility, you walked maybe 50 feet at most, not even that. You're 25 feet. And you immediately went into this release facility. It was purpose built for this. And if my notes are correct, and I encourage support here, trying to mind the release release facility had change out rooms for people. They, as I said, was co-located. They work with the release coordinator. They had community navigators there. They have a release coordinator on, one release coordinator on staff at night, 2 during the day. There is a community navigator that has access to the courts, to different services, to providers. In that release area, they had a small store area. They had waiting area for folks that are coming out and their families to meet them there. They could work with probation there, court liaison, the health department, different service providers were just offered offices within that facility. And it had a much calmer, nicer feel to it. And that was a place that if there was a delay in transportation, you could sit there and it felt comfortable and good. So my colleagues, please. Yes, Judge Stafford.
How big is Yavapai County and how many beds were at that facility?
So yeah,
I
Yavapai
do
County,
know Pima County.
Okay.
What?
Yavapai County is very rural. It is the size of New Jersey. The county is the size of New Jersey. The Camp Verde has 644 beds, which is the facility we did not see. Yavapai, which is the facility we did see, has 152 beds. It is really for intake and holding until first appearance, and then it's a release or book kind of facility. So it's not meant to be a long-term facility, but the Connection Center was so impressive because the backside of it was a mental health crisis center where people could be admitted voluntarily or involuntarily, but the front of it was this release space where somebody from, housing solutions, whatever it might be, can use an office space and actually work with people as they're released. So any social service agency could send a resource person to this Connection Center and engage with those who are leaving incarceration and to provide the kinds of resources that they need. And we really appreciated seeing that because it went hand in hand with this idea of having a release coordinator assigned right from the moment somebody entered. Because if they went on to Camp Verde if they were booked in for a sentence and they go to Camp Verde, they still have this release coordinator working with them throughout their entire time. And it's somebody who's going to understand the mental health needs, the treatment needs, housing needs, family needs, and they specifically work with the families of the incarcerated individuals to help understand the needs of the person. So it's not just within the facility itself, but they're actually working in the community as well, which we thought was incredibly valuable. And that was a great addition. One of the key takeaways we got from this Connection Center and from the way they manage this facility is their planning concept was, we thought, was really incredible, which is to bring services to the inmates rather than bringing inmates to the services. And we really thought that resonated with us because it makes a great deal of sense. One of the things that we saw in this facility were low ceilings. We saw some other things that we didn't really like, but it stood in great contrast to Maricopa, because in Maricopa, they purposefully went away from the institutional look of stainless steel sinks, stainless steel doors on bathrooms in the intake area. They went with what would look like a hotel room kind of furnishing, wood door, ceramic sink instead of stainless steel. And it does really impact the way you view that facility, even just as a visitor. To go in and have the hard stainless steel seats that Commissioner Jones talked about versus having soft furnishings that can be moved around. And having, tables and desk areas that are more comfortable. It really changed the feel of the facility, and that was something we noted because we saw something very different in Yavapai, which is sort of that standard institutional stainless steel toilet, stainless steel sink, stainless steel door in the intake area. And it really does change the perspective of the person in that room. And we think that that's something that's really important to keep note of.
They had plans at that facility also for inmates up to 152, that they would have 50 tablets that could be shared among individuals. And then at this facility, they also had built a way oversized stainless steel kitchen with the intent that if there were a community emergency of some sort, that this kitchen could be used to help prepare food for the general community. And that as part of that, they actually had a separate lockup area for inmates in the kitchen so that if people were coming in and out, they didn't worry about somebody trying to leave. They could quickly shuttle them in there and then quickly release them. And they were also, like the other areas that we saw and is also done here, trustees do help with cooking the food, and they can do some of the same things that Sheriff Marte has talked about with the ServSafe and other job skills. So it was this big kitchen as well as the release center there that made an impact on me. Anything else, Commissioner Jones?
Not that I'm thinking of. I think the two of you covered it pretty accurately. It was due to open in about 2 months, probably is opening just about now. They were just finishing with the painting.
Right. Yes.
I do have two follow-up. One, I think what I'm hearing is they actually have two different jail facilities. The first one for a short term, which is about 150-ish beds, and then another one, which is a larger facility, around 660. So they have two different jails, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We didn't see the big one.
Okay. And then you mentioned a release coordinator. I wasn't clear on the title, so I apologize. Can you tell me, from understanding what their job responsibilities, how that was different than our current pretrial release program? Because that seems like a good place to understand gaps.
I couldn't answer that because I don't know enough about our own pretrial release program. So it's my understanding that if you were out there, one of the things, if you needed healthcare when you exited, they would try to line things up. If you needed to be signed back up for your Medicaid, if you needed to work on housing, if you needed to be linked with your family again, that the release coordinator, that's part of what they could do. Not all. I'm not claiming that that's all, but they were trying to make the transition back into the community as smooth and as permanent as possible. They also had a grant to study whether or not this kind of programming helped to reduce recidivism.
Can I ask one?
Of course.
Sorry to keep her.
I would add that they, also will link the inmate with their probation and with the appropriate courts as well. So they really serve as sort of a criminal justice and community and familial liaison. It's really quite impressive.
I would also add that their pre-release was available 24 hours, 7 days a week on holidays, which we haven't yet been able to do with ours.
Sorry, Judge Crothy?
Yeah, I think that program sounds great. I was just wondering if you found out like how much that costs. You said theirs was partially state funded. Do we have, I don't know the answer to this, funds in Indiana for that sort of program?
They said that they also use some, what she referred to as federal RSAP dollars, as well as some of the profits from the commissary to help fund it. So I have not looked into these federal dollars, but I certainly think that's something that we could explore as we move forward with people.
But you don't know their budget, I'm assuming.
Well, at this point, because they hadn't opened there yet,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
but certainly the release coordinator had already been working at Camp Verde with folks there. Yes, Commissioner Thomas.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the things we learned is that our system of funding in Indiana is really backwards. So when we talked about funding, for example, in Tucson, we find out that there's this regional mental health authority or behavioral health authority that ensures that everything's funded and then worries about how to pay for it later. We're going to be facing something very, very different here in Indiana in terms of funding, but it's certainly, I think one of the things that really helps with this connection center is that they offered that office space, the desk space to any resource in the community that wanted to be there. So they're not paying to put that person there, but it certainly helps those community groups to get the word out and to connect with clients directly. So it's a win-win.
Right. Should we move on and talk about what we saw in Pima County in
I have a
Tucson?
question.
Sure.
Is the release coordinator employed by the sheriff?
It was my impression that was, wow, I'll contact Bea.
And how
Yeah.
many they weren't assigned to all 600 people, right?
One person? No, but like the intent
Right.
was to have three people at least there at that one smaller facility. And so
Three
I don't know.
coordinators for 150, I don't remember.
Yeah, but
52
some of
people.
those move through pretty quickly, right? Because they're short term, some of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these were.
They were employed by the jail. Yeah.
They were employed by the jail. Is that what you have in your notes? Okay, so yes, they were. Okay. So I will ask the group at this point, we were going to leave some time at the end for different comments here. But would you rather us go through what we saw in Pima County as thoroughly as we can? I mean, Pima was for me the real highlight of part of what we saw and really speaks to some of the treatment issues that we would all like to see here. But I want to take the kind of temperature of the group. Should we just go and then stop again in 10 minutes or what?
I don't know if people have other things they wanted to say. I know that there was email discussion about Sheriff Marte talking. I don't know if you wanted Sheriff to.
I
Have some
invited
at the
him to
end.
speak at the commissioners meeting if he wanted, so it would be on tape for people. They wanted.
I
So-
can't speak for him. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe it would
Thank
be
you. Very
helpful.
gracious.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be helpful if we, because I would like to hear the sheriff's presentation. If maybe the next agenda, we could create some space for that, especially since I'd like to hear if there's any other current needs that we need to be aware of to be supportive of. I just want to make sure we're checking in, if that's possible.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Counselor
Lauren
Iverson.
Crossley, yes.
Yes, it was my understanding that we were also going to talk about the jails visited in Kentucky, Ohio, and throughout Indiana. I think it would be nice to make the time for all that today to get that out of the way. And it would be nice to extend the meeting a little bit so that we could get to all those facilities that we visited for comparison's sake.
Counselor Crossley.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo what Council Iverson said. I know we have had, this has been like the moment we've all been waiting for in terms of trying to hear the visits. Because I definitely wanted to hear, and I think everybody wanted to hear about Arizona and the other ones. And I also think those that went through Hendricks and Kentucky as well. But I just echo what he said. And if I don't know if it is, I know we have a real hard time of, cutting it off at 6, but I'm a big proponent for extending if possible, but I do want to hear all about the visits as well.
What are the other members?
I wondered if the commissioners had made any decision on the number of beds.
We have not.
I would
Because-
also ask in response to one of the gentlemen who spoke publicly earlier, if the commissioners have any thoughts on the different architects and a public presentation, as I feel that that would be very helpful for all of us to hear from the different architects and to hear what kinds of things they're recommending. I'm personally very nervous about the thought of us ending up with a 2,800 bed jail. I don't think any of us are thinking in that direction, but I would like to hear from them.
For me, part of this is what other things do we do in our community besides the jail? Do we build a treatment facility? And Counselor Iverson and I have been into some discussion with people. There's going to be some money available through the state, we think, for treatment. So can we substitute beds for treatment that would do something differently? So that's for me, my personal holdup. I don't know about others. I don't want to speak for others. But are people willing to stay a bit? Judge
No, I
Crowley?
was just wondering, could we just maybe hear about Pima? Would it be possible to talk about the other ones at the next? It seems like it's going to be an extended conversation, but I'm fine to do whatever, but
I'm fine with doing the other meetings.
I am going to the basketball game at 8. I'm just gonna leave. I'll just leave if I have to.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay. I desperately want to hear about Pima. I also want to hear from the sheriff. I also want to hear from Counselor Iverson about the policy brief that he wrote. And I would love to talk about land options, and I would love to talk about subcommittees, and I would love to hear about the architects. So I would love to hear any information we can get shared, and I'll stay as long as it takes.
Well, I'm willing to move the discussion of the other places to the next meeting, if that would fit with people, because I think what we saw in Pima is very relevant, like I said, for me, what kind of treatment is available, because we've heard people now for years, people from other counties, even in Indiana, saying the jail should not be a treatment center. It's the largest treatment center across the state for people with mental illness and substance use disorders. So in Pima County, which is 1,045,000 people, over 900 square miles, or no, over 9,000 square miles in Pima. I was looking at that for other reasons. We went to their crisis response center, and that is part of a campus that the county paid for. Their building itself opened in 2011. It started, I think, in 2006 that they started building it, but it was a campus that consisted of this crisis response center with a direct hallway, enclosed hallway to their medical center, meaning they're one of the hospitals there. And then right on the same grounds was a mental health center, an inpatient facility. But with the crisis response center, there was no wrong door. It served adults and juveniles, voluntary and involuntary admittance. Their main jail was actually about 12 minutes away, and the facility was both what I think of as our zero intercept and perhaps our 5 intercept for people that might be out on probation and parole. One of the 2 people that we met there was actually the mental health leader for the Tucson Police Department. That was his role. And he was there to talk about what law enforcement does. They can take Pima County law enforcement takes people to the crisis response center, and generally they're in and out within 5 minutes, 10 minutes max. And the way they have it set up is they have their own sally port for bringing people in. That's separate from the entrance For voluntary, that's separate. The adult is separate from the juvenile entrance. They actually, the facility is run by a private company called Connections. And they see thousands of people a year. Connections does not call law enforcement for assistance. They feel that they can handle basically anything. They get their hand off, and they view law enforcement as an equal partner. Let's see, sorry. They do a very quick assessment, no matter how the person comes in, and then they decide whether or not to admit or to refer on. That referral on may actually be to the medical center, depending upon what kinds of issues they're facing. The facility is secure. They said that they would be happy to have our local law enforcement come and view what they have there. They can also serve as a detox center. They are, let's see, sorry, I didn't get a chance to type all this up the way I wanted to. But the main county detox center is actually separate then from the jail. This is a least restrictive environment. And it also, for them, they figure that it's the least costly, and they were able to refer us on to some written published information. They also suggested that we look at what's going on in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Their state, as Commissioner Thomas said earlier, they actually have a regional health funding mechanism. And so what they do is they say, anybody that comes in the door, we will cover the first 24 hours of the stay. You don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. We'll figure out the funding. And that's covered by regional behavioral health through a block funding that they have. And then usually people are there for about 3 days, youth sometimes longer, but then it goes to either Medicaid or private health insurance funding. They do not do this as a fee for service basis. It's taken care of other ways. They also have some SAMHSA and county funding, but they figure that they save enough with not incarcerating people that this makes sense. They do, like I said, they do initial assessment, which is sort of like a triage, but then within 24 hours, they do a full assessment and figure out what's needed. They don't do any therapy short-term because people are there for 72 hours. If they need to then go on for other things, they can refer them on and work with that. They see themselves as a stabilization facility for folks. And they said that oftentimes people are referred by family and friends and even schools, welfare system. They rely on a strong network of other providers. And they also have mobile crisis units. And I don't know if others here in the area are familiar with this, but Centerstone through Stride Center has started a mobile crisis unit. So we now have that available as well. It took a lot of training. Their law enforcement is trained in trauma-informed care. They go through that as part of what they do. They don't use handcuffs for people that they bring to this crisis center. And they actually, what they called it was mental health first aid for all their law enforcement officers that they put them through as training. Let's see what else. They have a dedicated law enforcement entryway. There is sort of no wrong door is their philosophy. If you're already in the facility, you don't know if a patient, which door that patient was brought through, just because everybody is filtered into a hallway and then they're there. Staff is distinguished in terms of their roles by the colors of uniforms that they wear. And if you're there in and going through sort of that de-escalation, you're in sort of a room where all staff is able to observe you. So the nursing staff is there working with the psychiatric staff, is working with social workers, everybody is there working together in the room that can look out on over the group that's there. Let's see. They also felt like the needs of the involuntary patients were different from voluntary patients. And I don't know. They use more of a medical model, I guess, is also, it was not a correctional model. So I think that was important. Their people that worked there were in scrubs, so they looked much more like medical personnel all the time. And they offered to have us even go along on ride-alongs with their law enforcement to see what happens when they pick someone up. So I just felt like it was a very, very different approach, and something that, again, I would like to see us move toward, because I think it does work to the care and not the cages that we all are seeking. I'm sorry, I've talked too long. Commissioner Jones or Commissioner Thomas, what else do you have?
I think the thing that really struck me was the police officer who was also going through it with us. And it was clear that there was really strong buy-in from the officers, that they saw this as a really reasonable alternative and were very willing to work within the system. And that was very reassuring to see.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yeah, I would add, spot on, everyone. I would add that the system works really well with 988 and then a mobile crisis unit. And so they talk about, what percentages of people end up being treated just using 988, and then another percentage that is addressed through the mobile crisis services that they have. So we're really excited to see how that could help us in Monroe County as well, since we now will have that. But one of the things that really struck me was that what we're missing in this community, and something that we need to think about, is that the only way you could have a short-term crisis center like this is by having a long-term residential treatment center somewhere. And we just don't have that, and we really need it. So that's the thing that I think worries me the most. Thanks.
I do have a procedural question. So the individuals that were brought to this crisis center, were those individuals who were facing possible criminal charges, or there were ones that came in contact with law enforcement for, say, through a welfare check? I'm trying to figure out the percentage of individuals who, did any of them end up getting criminal charges, or trying to understand the function?
This to me was so that people weren't, it was an approach that didn't talk about arrest. It was an approach that talked about care and people in crisis, and helping them get through that crisis without having to involve law enforcement. But it was law enforcement that would often do the transport. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer or not, but that was the impression that I got.
So maybe in response to a welfare check.
It might have been. It could have been the schools also, but they describe people, maybe as somebody, and some of us may have seen this also even in our local community, that's just having a psychotic breakdown, and they don't need, that person is in need of care, not in need of incarceration. And so that's the kind of attitude that it was mental health that took priority, or the acknowledgement that that's what's needed.
I appreciate that. Sorry, I was trying to understand how the diversion program, if it was a diversion program, worked to get better educated about it.
Sure.
But it sounds like we're not sure if it was diversion in that same type of vein.
They didn't refer to it that way. They didn't use those terms. But in many ways, it was that zero intercept, so that people never get to the point where law enforcement is really called in as a law enforcement agency. They're there more to help with the mental health of people. Judge
Do you-
Prothy.
Yeah, if they're involuntary, do you know if a judge was sending them there, like on a mental health commitment? Is that what, like not a commitment, but an emergency?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That was our understanding anyway. Judge Stafford.
Thank you. I would be thrilled to have something like this available, even in my civil cases. And again, I don't have a criminal docket. I have a civil docket. I frequently have parents filing for orders of protection against their children due to mental health and substance use issues that make the adult child unsafe in the home. I have spouses with the same situation. I could make 2 or 3 referrals a week easily. What my concern is on funding. Does this county have the ability to pay for a long-term, not maybe in a long-term, but at least a short-term facility and to provide staffing who are highly competent and skilled on a long-term basis? I would love the answer to be yes, but that's why I'm asking the question, is because I'm afraid the answer is no.
Well, I think that that's one of the things that Commissioner Thomas talked about earlier, is that they have this regional health kind of funding mechanism in Arizona. And we would have to be digging for both state and federal monies to assist with this. But they also felt like they saved a good bit on the jail side with this. So I don't know if it also then saves on the use of the courts, because people are not then involved in the court system. These are some of the things I don't know.
So it sounds like to me that this particular example, the Pima County one, is a private health facility that is running everything.
Yes.
And it's a resource utilized by law enforcement as well as the community for behavioral health services, whether it's crisis or, well, maybe mostly crisis, because you said it's no more than 72 hours.
But also it's the attitude that we take care of people and then we'll figure out how we get paid
Right.
to take care of them. And so that first 24 hours, to the comments here, those were taken care of by either the county or that regional, because my impression was more the regional funding mechanism. And then after that, they could bill for insurance or for Medicaid. And so when I was looking up information on Indiana, we have a quasi expanded Medicaid program in this state. And so it's going to take digging to figure out if we could do the funding through that mechanism. But I did start to look already on some of that to see what we can do. Yes, Councilor Iverson.
And to that point, I would encourage everyone to contact their legislatures and encourage passage of Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 1006. Both of those have funding mechanisms to expand the services that we're talking about. And so, hopefully we can start moving towards what Commissioner Thomas was talking about in Indiana. But I agree with her, we are nowhere close.
Yes.
I apologize. I have to leave for another meeting.
Yes. I think there are several of us that have other obligations tonight. Commissioner Thomas, did you have anything else to add about what we saw in Pima County? And again, like Commissioner Jones said, the buy-in from the law enforcement was so strong that that's one of the people that was there to take us on this tour and to talk about with us about what they were doing out there.
I think I was, that Tucson officer was so impressive. One of the things he talked about was how there's this cultural shift in the Tucson Police Department itself. And it's really stuck with me. And he said that we're not pursuing a warrior mentality in our community, but a caretaker mentality. And I just thought that was so meaningful. And I assume that also reverberates into the other aspects of their criminal justice system. So I thought that was really impressive.
Yes. And I will try to pull up and share with people the article that we were referred to that was actually done by somebody out in Pima County on some of the cost differences that they saw, the savings that they saw from this. Because I think that also, and I think it's probably far less wearing to law enforcement to have these kinds of facilities available as well. And certainly far less wearing for the jail staff. To have others taking care of some of the folks that are in crisis. Judge Stafford.
How can we take a next step on this? How can we determine whether we have the ability to pay for anything like this? How can we move forward if we don't know those answers? In other words, I think everyone here at the table would love to see a facility like this, or I'm just going to pretend that we would for a moment. I know I would, but how can we take the next step in planning if we don't know if we can pay for something like this, which would be, I think, much more expensive than a jail? Not that it's not worth it, but are the dollars there?
They are there in other places. We need to do some digging. Like I said, I started to look already at sort of whether or not we can find money through Medicaid, whether or not we have the ability to bill private insurers. What's the cost savings to the county? Meaning we divert some funds away from the jail to a treatment facility like this. You know, we pay a lot right now for the medical that is done in the jail. And part of that is for psychiatric nurse practitioners and people like that. So we might be able to also save at that end if we have this other kind of a treatment thing. But it is expensive. Counselor Iverson and I were on the phone today with Linda Grove Paul at Centerstone, and Justice staff, Stride Center. Did she tell us $600,000 just to staff the Stride Center for a year? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's really expensive. And right now, House Bill 1006, which is this very thing that we're talking about right now, is allocated with just $10 million for the entire state, which is just simply not enough. This is such an expensive endeavor. And so that's what we're trying to figure out right now is what exactly would this cost to create something of a regional center like this, or even a local center like this. And just, you know, there's two sides to that coin. One is the cost of construction, but then what Commissioner Githens was getting at too is the cost of operation is something that unless we have outside funding, this county cannot sustain.
Let me just ask for comparison. I believe the psychiatric nurse in the jail is less than one full-time equivalent. Is that right? Or is it one full-time equivalent or two? I don't know. I apologize. In other words, do we have 40 hours a week, 80 hours a week?
I think we have 80 hours a week. I think that's because we approved the contract.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Commander Gibbons.
Yeah, the psychiatric nurse. I was just curious. Okay, thank you. Okay, so
Yeah.
just to repeat what Commander Gibbons said, if I'm inaccurate at all, please correct me, but it was the equivalent of 2 full-time positions, 80 hours a week of psychiatric nurse practitioner. Is that correct, sir? Okay.
And then there also are 2 licensed clinical social workers, right?
Yes, those are the people we're talking about.
Okay. Those are the social workers are the nurse practitioners.
No,
But
that's what I was trying to get clarification. So we have 2 80-hour social workers. We have 1 nurse practitioner that's part of the ACH staff. But that
Okay.
focuses on medical only.
Okay.
typically.
so do we have anyone who can prescribe mental health medication in the jail?
Yes,
The nurse practitioner.
yep, through our mental health providers.
Okay. So when we are looking at what cost savings we would have, I guess my question is to Commander Gibbons and to Sheriff Marte, if we had another facility like the one they're talking about, that would essentially be a state mental health hospital, but maybe more functional and locally based, would you no longer need the psychiatric care within the jail itself?
We would still need that.
That was my, so I don't see that, for example, we could save any money by taking those services out of the jail. Because I would worry that we still are going to have people who need to be incarcerated, whether for their safety or the safety of the community, but who still deserve and need mental health treatment. We're still going to need to have mental health treatment available within the jail.
I agree. I was
Okay.
trying to give the commissioners time to fully make their statement, and then I was backing that up with what you just said, because you're right. We cannot just get rid of it from jail.
Okay.
We'll always need that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And I didn't want to step on your toes. I
No,
just
no.
was very concerned
No,
about.
no, That's,
Okay.
that's completely legitimate, I think. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, it's by not incarcerating that we save money. Yeah.
Of course, and
Yeah.
and if that's possible, but of course, sometimes people commit crimes who are also mentally ill and therefore we have,
We
we
know.
will need services in both places.
Yes, yes. Well, it is 6:10. It sounds like we will continue our discussion of all this and hear Sheriff Marte's presentation on April the 3rd. And then we'll figure out what our next steps are. Does that work? I don't want to keep people super late and I'm,
It works for us. We're ready. So it's up to the committee members what they decide. So we're fine.
And I didn't mean to step on Sheriff Marte's toes. If
not.
you had other stuff you wanted to say, I didn't mean to foreclose that in any
You
way.
did not.
and Counselor Iverson has something also. Sorry.
I just wanted to clarify that I'm hearing correctly that the Sheriff Marte will have time on the agenda for our next meeting.
Yes,
Okay, wonderful. We'll make that happen.
thank you. And thank you to everybody who's here tonight. I hope that some of these discussions are the kinds of things that are encouraging. And there's a lot, it's clear that we have a whole lot of work to do. Thank you all. And thank you, Ms. Mosier.
Oh, can y'all still hear me?
Nope.
So Iverson is, yeah.
Did you have
Okay.
more?
Yeah, I just had a really quick question. Because we had a lot that we heard from the commissioners in terms of the visits. And it was really kind of hard to follow what was written on the dry erase board here in Zoom land. So I was just wondering, you know, like we heard like the oral report of the visits. I guess with the continuation of more talks about visits in April 3rd, are we going to have a written report so that we can all go back and defer that can be put on the CJRC's website on the county? Can we do that if possible?
We'll have at least notes from tonight and I'm taking pictures of what we've had up on the board. I'll work with others to see what seems appropriate at this point. Counselor Iverson?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that copies of the policy brief that was written by numerous county council members is there for you. I would encourage you to look at page 2, where we make a recommendation for bed size. And I would encourage you also to look at page 3, where there is a timeline that is referenced from the DLZ proposal that gives a lot of clarification. There's a couple pieces of the chat here in Zoom from Lisa Young. And I think there's a lot of questions on how we're going to work on this, what the future is going to look like. And I think page 3 kind of helps clarify that. So please do take a look at that and trying to provide some clarity on the process here.
Thank you.